Backyard Green Films is proud to present this episode of Agri-Culture with your host, Alara Bowman. Alara and her husband Rick travel throughout the land in their teardrop trailer that they have nicknamed Maggie, bringing you stories about their travels and the people they meet. They visit farmers, ranchers, and just about anyone who loves putting their hands in the dirt or their feet in stirrups. For the past 3 years, they have been filming a documentary about heritage breed animals entitled The Holstein Dilemma, Heritage Breeds, and the Need for Biodiversity. In those travels, they have gotten to meet some very interesting people. Here's one of those interviews.
Hi, I'm Alara, and welcome back to our podcast, Mule Days. This is one of those events that illustrates just how much of a dorky square I am, and I've been looking forward to going to this ever since I heard about it about 1.5 years ago. This particular Mule Day celebration is held in Bishop, California in late May every year. It's a week-long event and it has classes and shows and competitions and, of course, a parade. 2019 was the 50th anniversary of the first Mule Day celebration in Bishop, California. This is not the only celebration of the very interesting creature that is the mule, I found out. There's one event in Tennessee, for example, that's purported to bring in over 200,000 people over a week's time. It's pretty impressive, and it's one I'm sure I'll be trading marriage points to go see. Bishop was important to me, though, because it was part of my dad's old stomping grounds. My dad enjoyed all aspects of outdoor life, but especially ranching and farming. He would often go up to spend time in Boise and northern Nevada, and the old 395 highway was one of his ways to get there in the 1940s and 1950s when he went through. This is, of course, before they put in Interstate 15, and you could pretty much drive from San Diego almost to Canada on old 395. The route's within eyeshot of a number of places you might recognize. It starts in California and includes the Mojave Desert and Mount Whitney. It passes the Mammoth Mountain Ski Area and Mono Lake in California, Reno and Carson City in Nevada, Pendleton in Oregon, and the Columbia River and Spokane up in Washington. If you follow it the remainder of the way, you end up at the Canadian border. Bishop itself is a little town of about 4,000 people on the eastern side of the Sierra Mountain Range, an hour north of Lone Pine on the 395. It's in Inyo County, which has both the highest and lowest points in the contiguous United States. That's Mount Whitney and Badwater Basin, if you were curious. I don't know if you've driven north across the backside of the eastern Sierras toward Nevada, but it can be a desolate landscape at times. It's so desolate, in fact, that it's easy to believe that Death Valley National Park is within a stone's throw of the old 395. The average temps there are said to be 65 degrees in December and about 116 degrees in July. Average rain is almost 2.5 inches a year. If you've seen the pictures, it's just like that, but with lots of heat. Which brings me to the next part of Bishop Mule Days that I find interesting, and the thing that most people might think about when they hear the next words put together in a sentence: Death Valley and laundry. Huh? Laundry? The Death Valley thing I get due to the location part of this conversation, but laundry? You sweat a lot there, but still. Okay, so this is how they're connected if you didn't already guess. You can go to nps.gov for more details on this one. But basically, a boron compound was found in the 1880s near Furnace Creek Ranch, in that area that we now call Death Valley. This was a big deal, as this seemed to be the go-to product for detergents, metal processing, curing, blacksmithing, and household products, among other uses. Soon, there were 40 men working full-time at the mine, producing about 3 tons of borax a day. The problem is you have to get the stuff out of this extremely hot and lonely location to where you can sell it, and you couldn't exactly call your local UPS to do it. No trains out there yet either. So what do? You hitch a bunch of strong, drought-tolerant animals to a really big wagon and make the 165-mile trip across very primitive roads in screaming heat to get to the nearest railhead. It took them about 10 days to do the trip, and they had to carry most of what they would need, including food and water. The wagon itself weighed about 4 tons empty and 36 tons loaded. The back wheels on the thing were 7 feet tall, and you'd better be able to lift 1,000 pounds if you need to change a wheel. The wagons were driven by what are called mule skinners. It sounds really, really unpleasant, but so far as I can tell, the word comes not from the skinning of a mule for hides, but more from the whip that was used by the drivers and the damage it could do if it was wielded in a manner that was less than careful with a mule's surface area. They were pretty skilled at it, but it's a nasty, startling sound. And on to the mules. Scientific American had an article in 1877 that said that the Smith brothers were shipping out borax with mule teams across the Great Basin Desert. It's said that the name 20 Mule Team Borax came out as a promotional thing, but that's about what it was. Teams of 18 mules and 2 horses attached to some of the largest wagons ever pulled by draft animals. According to NPS.gov, the horses got the thing started, but the mules kept it going and are the smart ones in this particular setup. So you can see how Mule Days is a big thing here in Bishop, with that bit of history alone. When you combine that with the packers of the Eastern Sierras, Bishop is a great place to celebrate the wonderful creature that is the mule. By the way, the mule packing thing will definitely be on our podcast list in the future, so stay tuned for that. This was the 50th anniversary of the first Mule Days in Bishop, so it may have been a bit more of an event than usual, but maybe not. The people of Bishop, and mule people in general, I believe, really love to celebrate their animal. So this is the one day everyone gets into. All kinds of people come from all across the country to be in Bishop for Mule Days. There are breeders, scientists, ag schools, specialists, packers, riders, nonprofits, governmental organizations, and just plain tourists. You not only have mule people, but you also have the friends of mule people, and people that just plain like the idea of that many linear feet of ears in one place. The parade participants will give you a really good idea of what types of people show up at this event. They close off the main street in Bishop. It's actually a section of Old 395, and for the next hour or so, on goes the parade. This particular parade was one of the longest I'd seen. The Mule Days website claims it's the world's longest non-motorized parade, and I believe it. There are mules, donkeys, horses, wagons, drivers, riders, packers, school bands, and majorettes, costumes, carriages, and the whole thing ends up in the main arena of the fairgrounds. The big treat for me was to see the 20 mule team that went down the main street in the parade, pulling on one of the last of the remaining wagons from the old era. The caravan goes on for quite a bit. Imagine them all lined up in teams head to tail with their bells on their harnesses ringing as they walk. At the fairgrounds, there were events and information stands galore. Representatives of the California Highway Patrol were there, out of Sacramento, California, with the officers riding Shires and Belgian drafts that they'd ridden in the parade. The National Park Service was represented due to their long history of partnering with mules. Most everyone thinks of the Grand Canyon, but it goes a lot further than that. There were packing events, driving events, racing mules, equestrian events, chariot races, roping, and this really funny thing where a bunch of people race out on their mules, dismount, and have to go pick up a 5-foot-tall thing that looks like a giant bouncy ball. They then have to remount and race to the finish line. We had one gutsy 10-year-old that hopped with her foot in a stirrup for about 6 minutes while trying to get into the saddle, with her mule trying to figure out what in tarnation she was trying to accomplish. She didn't give up. No one in the audience could stop laughing, and it was wonderful. Our first interview at Mule Days was with Bill Garrett of Garrett Mammoth Jackstock in Stillwell, Oklahoma. Okay, so if you could just tell us, introduce yourself and tell us about your farm.
Well, I'm Bill Garrett, live in Stillwell, Oklahoma, and we've got a 450-acre place there, and we keep about 100 head of mammoth donkeys all the time.
100 head?
Yes, ma'am.
Now that's quite a few donkeys, if I'm not mistaken, because donkeys used to be used for crossing, for mostly to make mules, correct? I mean, that was one of the big purposes.
We do that. We sell them for that purpose, a lot of them.
Okay, so who do you sell them to? How do you make this animal pay its way?
Well, we've got a website, and people look on there, and we've been doing this for 51 years. and we are, got a lot of customers across the country, and people like the big stout, big bone mammoth donkeys, and they know where to come look for them. And so we put each of our colts on the website when it's 3 or 4 days old, and most of the time we sell the ones that we raise and breed by the time they're 6 months old.
So that actually surprises me that they want the big ones, because I would think that when they were draft animals they would want that a lot, but they want the big ones for riding too now?
Well, the big ones for riding, they all don't get 15 hands, and the ones that don't end up being riding donkeys. And but yeah, they want the Amish, and the people that breed to the draft horses want the big donkeys.
Yeah, we were down in Amish country and they wanted the Belgian cross with the really massive head that can pull all day, I'm sure.
And we sell a lot of those jacks, and then other people want them for, to raise riding mules, and then if they don't suit us for breeding purposes, then we geld them and break them to ride. And it's been an interesting thing.
So you're here at Bishop for Mule Days.
Yes.
Do you come every year?
We've been here like 27 or 28 years in a row.
Wow. Well, a lot of history of pack mules in this area.
There is. I don't know much about packing, but I know what they're looking for to breed their, to raise them. So we sell a lot of jacks.
So tell me a little bit, we were talking earlier about the history of this animal and why they're not as common as they used to be 200 years ago. Tell me your experience with that.
Well, a lot of the old guys are quitting. And look who's calling people an old guy. I'll make a joke about that. But they've quit. They've died off. They're not able to do it anymore. And I thank God every day that I'm still healthy and love to do it. I wake up ready to go to the barn at 5 o'clock every morning, and we're good. But the kids of these guys, they've moved off to town, and talked to one young man in Shelbyville, Tennessee last summer, and I asked him about his dad, who has passed away. He was a legend in that country, and he said that Nashville had moved out close to them, and the land was worth $25,000-$30,000 an acre, and they can't make that much money raising donkeys. So his 2 sons had moved away to get a regular job, and that was the end of it. And his name was Billy Trice, and he was literally a legend in this business. But as the guys get older, they sell out and quit, and the kids maybe don't want to work that hard, or they've moved away, or they've gotten married and left that part of the country, and the breeders are just dwindling away. There's some really famous breeders. Randy Bess in Missouri is a good friend of mine, and excellent breeder, but he's quit now. Joe Thomas lives in Tennessee, he's quit. I could go on and on and on naming them, but it's sad that they're quitting and nobody's taking it up.
Well, it's not an easy life, is it? Agriculture.
No, maybe not an easy life, but I've never been a very good employee. I don't want to punch nobody's clock, and so I like to be my own boss, and it's allowed me to do that.
I hear the mules are a little like that too, is that right?
Well, not necessarily. People don't realize the intelligence of a donkey. They think they're stubborn, but really most of the time, they're smarter than the people trying to train them, and that includes me. After 50 years, they teach me something every day.
Now,
it's amazing.
I've heard the phrase, you tell a horse what to do and you ask a mule. Would you find that to be true?
Yes.
So tell me about the personality of donkeys and mules.
Well, you're probably not going to make a donkey do anything. You've got to get them to. And they're just like pickup trucks. They've all got a different set of keys. You've got to find what they're willing to accept and what they're willing to do. And a mule's more like a horse, but if you ask them and sometimes you can insist, sometimes you have to figure out, what they want to do and how to get them to do it. And they're not hard to train. It just takes a lot of time, and we enjoy it.
Yeah. So now we've got, tell me about this animal here, if you would.
She is my daughter's new show animal. She's only 3. She's right at 15 hands. We've had her mother and her dad are about 5 generations back, and she chose her. She sold her show donkey, and for a lot of money, more money than she should have gotten out of it. But she picked this one, and I got the big hug and everything, and I knew it was going to cost me, and this is what it cost me. But she got a chance to sell that saddle donkey that she had won this donkey pleasure class here 3 years in a row with, and she's going to nursing school this fall, hopefully, and it's time to sell, and so she did. But I wasn't planning on her coming back and fleecing me for the best 2-year-old I had, but she did, and that's fine too.
So now you raise just donkeys. You don't raise the mules themselves? You just use the...
we just do somebody's got to raise the starter kit.
Yes.
If there's no jacks, there's no mules.
Yes, and that's one of the things that I find to be interesting about the whole economy around the mules and the donkeys, is because you really do have to feed quite a few donkeys in order to be able to have just anything to breed to a mule. That's an expensive proposition sometimes.
It is. It's expensive, but a donkey or a mule is not something people have to have. They might want one.
Well, this is a very interesting crowd too. This is definitely, it's Mule Days, so it's
right.
a mule crowd. But it's not this specific thing where you're just packers. There's equestrian events here, and they're racing, and they're doing a whole group.
A mule can do anything a horse can do.
And do you find the same thing true of donkeys?
They will, but they're not. I tell people all the time, if you want to race and you want to rope calves and that kind of thing, donkey's the wrong animal. They're not going to give you that. But if you want to ride and enjoy and relax and go up there and look around and in those mountains and just they're a lot more relaxed and laid back, and a lot of people are a lot of young people are riding them and training them, and 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you had a donkey that would lope all the way around that big arena, you could win any class in the country. But we're breeding them better with more endurance and more want to, and learning more about how to train them. And now every donkey out there will lope.
Interesting. So now this is a very different look than the first mammoth jack we met. I was telling you about Bob Doxey in Missoula. This is a different coloration. This is 100% mammoth jack?
Yeah.
So they come in, what colors do they come in?
Any color, right down through there. There's this color, there's black, there's beige, there's browns, there's paints, there's all colors.
It's a really beautiful animal.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. Now, this is interesting to me that they use this to breed with draft horses, the bigger bones, because this is not a massive animal. And yet, this is the one that they often use to get a bigger draft horse. Is that correct? Bigger draft mule. Is that correct?
Well, her daddy is 15.3.
Yeah, that's not small.
But then he, got a lot of bone and stuff, and everybody likes something different. Yeah. That's why we got 100 head. It aggravates me if somebody comes and they want something and I don't have it.
So how do you think this differs from George Washington's vision, or his because he was involved in breeding the mammoth jack originally. How do you think this compares to the animal that he had during his time?
Well, I have no idea.
Can you guess?
I could guess, I suppose, but they wanted the big ones back then, and then it kind of came down to the little pencil-legged donkeys, and we're going back to at least our herd is going back to the bigger bone, stouter. I don't like for mule colts out of my jacks to get up in those mountains and break down because they don't have enough leg under them and that kind of thing. So but everybody doesn't feel that way. I do, and that's my deal. And a lot of people agree with me, a lot of people don't, and that's fine.
That's why we have all the different strains of every breed we have, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. It's a beautiful animal.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Our next conversation was with Steve Miller and Lauren Brandt of KIBS Radio in Bishop, California. They've rescued 2 BLM wild burros, and you'll hear a little bit about it next.
What kind of donkeys are they?
Well, we adopted them from the BLM.
Ah, okay.
So
They're wild burros.
they're wild burros. And this is Willie, and that's Waylon. And we own the local country radio station here,
Okay.
KIBS FM, and they are our mascots.
So you don't ride them, they just hang out and keep you company?
Well, they come to events like this. They're going to be in the parade tomorrow with fundraisers, grand openings, things like that.
So they're BLM donkeys, and did you have to do a whole lot of
Sure.
training and breaking and that
Well,
kind of
we
thing?
have Jerry Tyndall, Horse and Mule School. He's been helping them for years, and they were totally wild when we got them, and they still have a little wild in them, but they're much more domesticated now.
Do you know where they came from on BLM land?
Yeah, they were originally from Mojave area, and it turned out they were from the same herd. I mean, we picked them out independently.
When they round them up, they give them a freeze brand, freeze mark,
Okay.
and that's where they can tell where they came from. And,
Yeah,
and
they
it
seal their
turns out
necks.
they put about 20 of them together for us to pick from. And the brown one stood out from the rest, and we picked that one, and then the other one came over to him, and it turns out that they were from the same herd.
So they were little. They were like this tall.
6 months.
Like
They're not
6
that
months
much
old.
big. They're not that much bigger now, are they?
They're a lot heavier.
So tell me about the BLM adoption process. What goes on there?
Well, I think they're having one. Actually, we know they're having one this weekend too. It's really simple. You go to an event where they have the different animals to be adopted, and there's a small fee. You have to be able to provide the right area, the right fence. You don't actually own them for a year. They actually check up, make sure you're taking good care of them, and so it's a really nice process, if you will. It's like adopting a child, with all this paperwork and everything. So, but we're very, very pleased that we did it, and they're our buds. They're like our big kids. Probably too much so. We treat them like big dogs, and we really need to be a little stricter with them, but that's what we're told, because we kind of love on them a lot.
What happens if somebody doesn't adopt them?
Well, I think eventually they will go to a sanctuary. I'm not positive if they will go to a different BLM facility for a different type, different triad, a different adoption. Maybe if it's in one area, they move them to another area. But we got fortunate with these guys.
They're beautiful. Aren't they cute?
Well, thank you.
Our last interview was with Amy McLean of the UC Davis Agricultural Department. This interview is one that we would definitely like to continue further, and we'll bring you that conversation as well. What an interesting lady.
If you'd introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Dr. Amy McLean. I work at the University of California, Davis. My specialty is actually donkey and mule research, and I've been working with donkeys and mules honestly all of my life. They've taken me to about 30 different countries. We've done research looking at everything from blood chemistry, welfare, behavior. More recently, we have a study that's looking at actually trying to identify breeds of donkeys through their DNA. There's about 200 breeds of donkeys in the world, and close to 178, 179 of them are actually endangered. And when you tell people there's actual breeds of donkeys, I think they're always excited to hear that and also kind of shocked. But there's breeds of donkeys just like there's breeds of horses that have distinguishing characteristics that distinguish those breeds compared to others. So similar to horses in terms of height, bone, level of athletic ability, colors, things like that.
So why are these donkeys becoming endangered?
So the main reason a lot of the different breeds have become endangered is because they've lost their use. So when you actually look at the world population of equids, there's 100 million equids, and so equids includes horses, donkeys, and mules. And there's about 40 million donkeys in the world, about 13 million mules and hinnies, and then about 50 million horses. But in a lot of places, donkeys are no longer used as a beast of burden. So because they've lost that use, then they've lost the use for actually producing more of them. However, in Eastern Europe and then also in China, there is a big trend to actually produce donkeys as production animals to produce different human products such as milk, meat, and then there's also a growing skin trade industry in China.
Wow. So most people think of, you're here at Mule Days, and you might think that the purpose of the donkey is to make a mule, right? But it seems to me like with 179 breeds, did you say?
Yeah.
That's not going to be the only use.
That's exactly right. So donkeys first came to the U.S. for many different purposes. They were easy to fit on the size of a ship. The donkey was actually domesticated before a horse. And they were domesticated to be used as pack animals. And this was in the Mesopotamia region. And they actually connected communities. So it was the donkey that contributed more to mankind and society more than the horse did, because then people were able to put all of their goods on the back of a donkey and go from community to community and meet other civilizations and things like that. But we tend to think, especially here in the U.S., that the purpose of a donkey is to make a mule. And that goes back to the story of George Washington, who was given donkeys from the King of Spain and the King of Malta. And those donkeys were specifically used for mule production. And a lot of donkeys are used for mule production, but on a global basis, and like I said, I've worked in about 30 different countries, a lot of developing countries, the donkey is the poor man's animal. So the cheapest form of labor is first human and then a donkey. So a donkey is within the reach of the poorest of the poor people. So they're definitely used as a beast of burden, but this growing trend to use them in the U.S. as a performance animal has actually helped increase the number of donkeys, increase the interest in mammoth donkeys. In the U.S., we actually categorize donkeys according to their height. Instead of maybe different breed characteristics. But if you go places in Europe, if you go to China, you go Egypt, you go to a lot of other countries, Colombia, Brazil, there's distinguished breeds of donkeys that are actually trying to be preserved. And some of those are used for riding purposes, some are used for other production purposes.
So this is a mammoth, if I'm not mistaken.
This is a mammoth Jenny. Yeah, she's a great representation of the breed. Mammoth donkeys are endangered along with a lot of the other breeds that we know. And when you base a breed specifically on one characteristic, so these donkeys were based on height alone, and then also bone circumference, is not the best ideal situation for protecting a breed or distinguishing one breed compared to another. A lot of the genetics that went into a mammoth donkey were a lot of Spanish genetics.
Poitou, correct?
Yeah,
Is it?
well, the Poitou is actually from France. So this Jenny likely has some Andalusian in her. The Andalusian donkeys are from the Andalusia region of Spain. And they're gray to kind of this red color. They have a really nice long neck. They're very athletic, more refined like she is. Probably some Catalonian. Another nice-sized donkey from Spain is a Zamora, which actually helped preserve the Poitou from France. So again, one of the things I enjoy doing is learning about new breeds of donkeys and then coming back to the U.S. and looking at our mammoth donkeys and trying to pick out those traits that base back to an actual breed of donkey.
So you can really see the combinations that
Yes.
hit the phenotype. The physical characteristics of this animal tell you quite a bit, but then the genetic testing will tell you the remainder, correct?
Yeah, we're hoping to, in collaboration with the University of Cordoba, I work with a actual donkey geneticist there. He's a veterinarian. He's just finishing up his PhD. We've published quite a few papers on cognition and behavior genetic traits in donkeys, a lot with the Andalusian breed actually, because he's in the Andalusia region. But along with Javier and then a dear friend, Jordi Miro, Dr. Miro at the University of Barcelona, he's in the Catalonia region of Spain. And so he's looking at trying to distinguish the Catalonian compared to the Andalusians. And then I've also worked up in the northwestern corner of Spain, which is the Zamora region, and that's a bigger, thicker donkey. And again, when I see some of the mammoths, you can see traits that are more similar to the Zamoras than maybe some of our Andalusians or the Catalonians, that everybody thinks, oh, it's black, so it's automatically a Catalonian. That's not always true. There's, in Italy, there's a really large black breed of donkey called a Ragazzana, which is actually used for dairy production. It's similar to a Holstein cow, and a lot of times donkeys I see being confused as being Catalonian are probably closer to a Ragazzana, which originated in Sicily.
Now, one of the things that we've been focusing on is the heritage behind this. This animal, just in the countries that you've mentioned, is a representation of the demographic mix, of the history, of the culture of a people.
Yeah.
So it seems to me as if you might be able to say that this animal represents culturally a couple thousand years of
yeah, it really does. One thing I think of, I worked with a group of donkeys in Portugal, in Mirandes, Portugal, and it's actually the Mirandes donkey. And the Mirandes in Zamora helped save the Bois de Poitou that's so famous because of their very long hair.
The shaggy look,
yeah.
Yes.
Although the Mirandes and the Zamora have long hair as well, but they're less known of. But in those areas, those donkeys were used for two main purposes, and it was for vineyards, for planting grapes, collecting grapes on the vineyards, or helping plow and plant potatoes. And when you go into those communities, you see a very aging population of people because their children have moved off to the city and they don't want to preserve that heritage.
Well, the United States,
yeah,
the
like
same
thing
problem.
in the United States. So we've had to find a new purpose. But it's just so refreshing to go back to those communities and still see a donkey being used for that capacity and people trying to preserve their heritage. Some of the oldest vineyards in Spain and Portugal still use donkeys to pick grapes because otherwise they'd have to take out a whole row of grapes for the tractors to come in. So it's definitely it's more a way of life and preserving that culture. But at the same time, when you go places like Africa, the Middle East, and even some places in Asia and South and Central America, the donkey is still a very important component to a family's livelihood and survival.
Yeah. When you look at something like a tractor that costs $100,000 for a farm these days,
right.
If you're a small farmer, you can't afford that. So this animal produces manure too, which in a small farm situation, I can think might be a little more conducive to a working relationship that doesn't cost an arm.
Yeah, that's very true. Some of the things we've worked on actually in East and West Africa is different farmers that have transitioned from oxen to donkeys because of global warming and desertification, the Sahara getting larger. The donkey can survive on much less than an oxen can. So again, in very impoverished areas, it's much cheaper for an owner to keep and work a donkey. But when they're used to working cattle, they can't use those same methods with a donkey. But donkeys, unfortunately, are facing a new pressure that they've never faced before with the donkey skin industry that's going on in China. So a lot of these breeds are really under a lot of pressure, which they already were before, but even more so now with setting up different Chinese abattoirs and harvesting facilities throughout developing countries, and they're going in and decimating the donkey populations. And when they do that, they take away the genetics and they're endangering those breeds even further, as well as even increasing the level of poverty for people that rely on a donkey.
So what do you do to try and save that? Because I have viewed this as a worldwide problem, but not so much as when we began this conversation. We're really facing the same thing in other countries that we are here. These are going extinct.
Yeah, we really are. And I've worked in China, and I've worked with a lot of the large companies that are using donkeys in this capacity. And going back to culture, this is a 2,000-year-old culture to use donkeys for their skin to make it into a gelatin product that has lots of Chinese traditional medicine purposes and attributes. But in China, they're actually very interested in preserving their different breeds of donkeys. So the donkey that's used for the Yizhao product was a black donkey that was the size of a mammoth donkey or even larger than a mammoth donkey. They have a completely black nose, black points, so meaning the eyes are black, the belly's black. Magnificent donkey, but that's supposed to be the prize donkey that for this product that's been a part of their culture for 2,000 years. But when you go in each province in China, there's a specific breed of donkey that has certain characteristics. The Chinese government, a lot of different universities in China are very interested in trying to preserve these breeds so they can continue to use this product. But again, donkeys in China and their purpose has shifted from a draft animal, agrarian purpose, to now an animal for human products. So it's very interesting to see that shift and that change in the use. You were asking about mule production earlier. The best country that would still utilize donkeys primarily for producing mules would be Brazil, where mules are instrumental on all of the large ranches to this day. And that would be the Pega donkey breed that is really prized and fetches prices of $40,000 to $50,000 to make mules for their ranches.
So now you said in the beginning, you said that's a prize-winning donkey over there. Is it for mule production, or is it that donkey within itself has a specific purpose? What makes that donkey a prize?
Yeah, so the donkey we saw earlier is a performance donkey. So in the U.S., the donkeys have found a new use or purpose as a performance animal, just like a performance horse. So as well as for recreational purposes, because they're extremely safe and docile for someone who's interested in riding, or for young children. This is the perfect animal. So the donkey that we were attending the party for, he is 2 generations of genetics of producing superior athletic donkeys as well as mules that have won championships competing in various performance events.
When you say performance, you mean equestrian events like jumping?
Yeah, well, some of the mules jump, but the donkey themselves, they do have one jumping class, but also classes that evaluate their quality of movement, their level of trainability. So the donkeys are being ridden in English and Western attire as well as driven. So they're challenging them to do everything that you would do with a horse. Here in California, we're really fortunate. We actually have mule racing. So there's specific jacks that are known for producing mules that run, that have a speed index just like a thoroughbred racehorse.
We saw that earlier, and
yes.
It's just a bizarre sight to see if you're not used to it, but they run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's also another use and contribution of a donkey and of an athletic donkey. So
you look at those ears and you think wind resistance and speed. I don't know if those two things to go together. What's the purpose of the large ear on a donkey?
So the long ear on the donkey, the orbital socket, as well as even the shape of the nasal cavity, all goes back to being a desert creature and their ability to withstand sandstorms, and then also for heat tolerance. And there's still a few actual wild species of donkeys that are left. There's the onager that's in Asia. There's the Somalian wild ass. Unfortunately, Nubian wild ass is actually gone, and then the kayag. But those are still true wild asses that are left in the world. Unfortunately, they're left in areas that are either war-stricken zones, or they're limited in their resources such as water just because of population growth. So, but that's the original donkeys that were then domesticated, and then we started all these different breeds and selecting them for their phenotypes and their different characteristics.
That's one of the things that we've also been covering with people is when you have a population that's at risk, it doesn't matter if it's here or somewhere else, you might have 100 breeding pairs or 1,000 breeding pairs, but if they're all in one specific location, they're subject to the vagaries of climate change and war.
And disease. Disease is the other one too. We've been doing some research at UC Davis, several of my colleagues and I, actually with the burrows down in Death Valley, and looking at pathogens, the pathogen frequency in donkeys coming off the range to see if they're harboring any diseases. And that's definitely probably one of the biggest threats, is disease transmission when you have a population of animals.
So are some breeds of donkey more resistant to disease than others?
That we don't know. We're just starting to study vitamin E and selenium in donkeys, and we've done that with a population in Italy as well as Portugal. And then we pulled some samples on the donkeys down in Death Valley. But in general, they're very healthy, and they seem to be more resistant and in terms of some sense to disease than horses. But things like equine influenza, pneumonia, which can be caused from various bacteria, can definitely affect donkeys. Where are we going? Huh? You want to go see Pearl? Okay, we'll just switch sides.
In terms of your experience with the personalities of donkeys, is it pretty uniform across the sphere of the breeds?
To me, the different breeds do have different demeanors and different personalities per se. We've tried to do some research on trying to quantify those personalities related to that breed of donkey. So like the Andalusian donkeys are a little bit harder donkeys, so they have a little more energy. The Catalonians seem to be a little more laid back, but still have enough drive and flightiness, so they're actually trainable. The Zamores, the Poitous, they're a lot more laid back, so there's a lot less energy. Some of the Italian breeds, there's about 10 different breeds of Italian donkeys. Again, they all vary in their level of excitement. The Pega donkeys seem to be a little bit hotter as well. And when I say hotter, they're just more reactive. So, okay, are we getting reactive
Are we at
right
the end
now?
of her?
We might be at the end of this donkey.
Her tolerance level?
Yeah, she might want to go back. Do you want to go back, or do you want to go eat some grass?
Well, we have her out really quickly. Can you tell me what makes this a great representation of a mammoth, but specifically Andalusian? Straight back is, that's an amazingly straight back for me.
Yeah, this Jenny's got a really nice long neck, a great head and ear on her in terms of a mammoth donkey. The Andalusian, she has distinguishing characteristics that are similar to Andalusian, but the Andalusians are a little bit thicker. There's a little bit differences in their body characteristics. But when you look at balance, so you would divide this donkey into thirds, you can tell by the length of her neck compared to the length of her back, those are pretty proportional. Ideally, you'd want the hip to be similar in length, but we never find that in our performance horses, donkeys, mules. She's a fairly well-made donkey. Nice straight legs for the most part. She's refined, but still has nice bone capacity. So she would definitely, and again, her behavior is really nice. And that's something sometimes people forget about when they're breeding for.
Definitely, because you do breed for behavior as well as
You're right. Yeah. The attitude's really important. But again, what is the purpose? How are you going to use the donkey? That needs to be considered when you're looking at that for breeding, either for a mule or for a horse. Those are both really important. Or a donkey.
So, in terms of economic viability, what this animal might be used for here is different from what it might be used for in Europe.
Yes.
Niche marketing is a big thing.
Yes.
If you have a niche that fits, even if it's a market that we don't like, is that a way of preserving the animal, or does it rub?
No, I don't think it's fair for us to say which purpose of donkeys one's better than the other. So I think as long as we have selective and responsible breeding, we have a purpose for the donkey, and we'll continue to preserve its breeds. The biggest reason these breeds have vanished is because they've lost a purpose. They've lost a use, regardless of what that use is. I've worked a lot in Italy with different dairy donkeys, and the donkeys in Italy have made a comeback because they found a new use, and that was to produce milk for human use.
Well, you just say that dairy donkey, and that just doesn't sound right to me, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and our
it's the closest thing to human's milk, and it's a premium product, and again, it's a great way that donkeys have once again contributed to mankind.
Yes.
But it's saved breeds of donkeys.
Yes, and if that's the case, then why not?
Right.
Why not? But our agriculture has become such a monoculture and such a single-purpose thing.
Yes.
You either are alive to produce eggs or to produce meat,
Right.
or to, this thing that we used to do way back when, where you have a tri-purpose or a quad-purpose animal, is leaving us. So it's very interesting to me. The thing that helps to make a comeback is the second purpose.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so another use of donkeys has been for henny production. So like this Jenny would be a great one to breed to a horse, and then you'd get a henny. There's a lot of fallacies about hennies, but in certain communities, especially like in Portugal and Baja, Mexico, I've worked with hennies in Colombia. In certain areas, they didn't have access to mare horses. So female donkeys were bred to one stallion, and they still would get, they'd get that hybrid cross. And there's a lot of great attributes of hennies in terms of being able to conserve water longer. A lot of owners say that they're as efficient in terms of nutrients as a donkey. So like in Baja, Mexico, where hennies are very popular in ranches compared to mules, a lot of that's because of that environment. So they find them to be a little bit faster, a little bit sturdier than the donkeys for going out gathering cattle, ranch work. But again, another great use of donkeys that's often overlooked is for henny production, not just mule production.
Didn't even think about it.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So explain that to me. Drought resistant hennies over.
So I've done a lot of different participatory research, interviewing owners of mules, donkeys, hennies in different countries, especially Central and South America, and why they might prefer a henny over a mule or a donkey over a horse. And one of the things they say about the hennies is that they're similar to donkeys and can go longer without water, can survive on poor quality forage just like a donkey, and even more so than maybe a mule. Again, this is anecdotal information, but again, coming from people whose livelihoods depend on this animal's ability to work. So I think there's some truth to be had in that. So yeah, and we've done some research too, just looking at there's differences with the hennies and blood chemistry compared to donkeys and mules, and they're really interesting animals, but again, you can see a lot of donkey characteristics and you see a lot of horse characteristics in them. But just another great use for donkeys.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us. This has
You're
been wonderful.
welcome.
We will definitely want to come talk to you at UC Davis. And
Please do.
I'm very excited that they're the ag department up there is. To close, we wanted to bring you some of the sounds from the event. You can hear the announcer describing things as they go along, but one of the most fascinating things you might hear is his description of the Young Living Percheron team as it went about the arena. Young Living is an essential oil company from Mona, Utah that sponsors the team and showcases the power of these beautiful draft animals. Jason Goodman is the driver of the Young Living draft hitch and gave an amazing display of skill and power as they drove about the ring. Jason and his wife Rose have generations of experience with driving teams and old-school teamster experience. This is now a dying skill, but it's a joy to watch in person. In the arena, Jason took the six-hitch team and displayed for the crowd how teamsters would back into a small space in a crowded city to unload cargo and move the horses without moving the wagon, and then go on down the road. It's today's equivalent of high-speed parallel parking with 6 large draft animals and no power steering. It was amazing. Jason and his wife Rose were being honored as friends of Bishop Mule Days for being supportive of events like this one, and I wholeheartedly agree that they deserve it. What a treat that was.
All right, they're coming down elbow, forward in the front, look at here, They are ready. The game set. Chariots are lined up, the flag is up. The chariot drivers are pulling on the chariot. Oh, look out. Look out. Nothing like college days when you could come over to Bishop for Mule Days, have a little fun with it. We're going to demonstrate a little bit. If you came into town, and if you came in here and had to do a little knocking, pull up alongside your dog. Then I'm going to be quiet so he can use voice commands here. There you are. Perfect. Now, when you would pull up to a dock like this, invariably you get a dock roll set up and somebody to come along and they need to go right where your horses are. That being the case, they still load your way. And he's hollering G to these horses. That is to go right. Jaw is left, G right. Wagon barely moving.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like us and subscribe and tell your friends. That's how we keep going.
We want to thank the town of Bishop, California for having us. It was a great pleasure to attend the 50th anniversary of Mule Days. For more information about this event, please visit muledays.org. We'd also like to thank the following people for their interviews. Bill Garrett of Garrett Mammoth Jackstock in Stillwell, Oklahoma. Steve Miller and Lauren Brandt of 100.7 FM KIDS Radio in Bishop, California. And Amy McLean of the UC Davis Ag Department. You have been listening to Agri-Culture with your host, Alara Bowman. Please tune in for more upcoming episodes from our travels. We'd also like to thank our producer, Michelle Council. I'm Rick Bowman, your behind-the-scenes editor. Until next time. This has been a presentation of Backyard Green Films Productions, all rights reserved, copyright 2019.